Welcome to the Terror Time.
The first story is about the doll in the attic. It all started when I found the doll in the attic. The house was old, the kind of place that had its fair share of ghost stories attached to it. I'd moved in to take care of some renovations, not thinking much about its haunted history. The attic was the last place I checked, cluttered with dusty old furniture and boxes that hadn't been touched in years. That's when I saw her, an old porcelain doll sitting on a chair, her glassy eyes staring straight at me. Something about her felt off. It wasn't just that she was creepy, though that would have been enough. It was the way the air around her felt heavier, colder. I should have left her alone, but I didn't. I picked her up, brushed off the dust, and brought her downstairs. That was my first mistake. From that moment, things started happening. At first, it was small. Lights flickering, cold drafts in rooms where windows were closed. But then it escalated. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. My heart raced as I got up to investigate, but no one was there. The doll, though, had moved. I had left her on a shelf in the living room, but now she was sitting at the end of the hallway, her head tilted ever so slightly, her eyes following me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to brush it off as a trick of my memory. Maybe I'd moved her and forgotten. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. That night, I woke up to the sound of laughter. It was faint, almost childlike, but there was something wrong with it, something evil. I lay there, paralyzed, my heart pounding as the laughter grew louder, more distorted. I forced myself to sit up and check the house, my hands trembling as I flipped on the lights. The doll was back on the shelf, but her head was turned sharply, her eyes fixed on me. I knew then that she wasn't just a toy. There was something inside her, something possessed. I tried to get rid of her the next day. I threw her into the trash, but when I came back inside, there she was, sitting on the kitchen counter, her blank eyes staring at me again. Fear gripped me. This wasn't just a paranormal event. It was a full-blown nightmare. I was being tormented by a doll that seemed to have a mind of its own. Over the next few days, things got worse. The footsteps became more frequent, echoing through the house at all hours of the night. Doors slammed shut on their own, and cold spots appeared in random places, as though a spirit was moving around the house. I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. No matter where I went, I could feel the doll's eyes on me, even when I wasn't in the same room. One night, I woke up gasping for air. It felt like something was sitting on my chest, crushing me. My vision blurred, and I could make out the faint outline of a small figure standing by the bed. It was the doll, her face twisted into a malevolent grin. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was trapped in a living nightmare, and I knew I was in real danger. The presence in the house wasn't just a real ghost. It was something darker, something more malicious. I could feel the weight of demonic energy pressing down on me. The doll wasn't just possessed. It was a vessel for something far worse. A demon, or maybe something even older, had attached itself to the doll, and it wasn't going to stop until it had taken everything from me. In a panic, I reached out to a friend who knew about these things. He came over, took one look at the doll, and immediately told me I needed to leave the house. He could sense the supernatural force that had taken hold of it. Together, we packed up my things, but before we left, we sealed the doll in a wooden box, hoping that would contain whatever was inside. I never went back to that house. My friend kept the doll locked away, but even now, I can still feel her watching me. Sometimes late at night, I hear the faint sound of footsteps, and I wonder if the doll has found its way back to me. The second story is about the doll in the window. I should have never moved into that house. From the first day, it felt wrong. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful even, but the old house at the end of the street had a reputation. Neighbors talked about strange noises and weird occurrences, but I thought they were just being superstitious. That was until I found the doll in the window. It was tucked away in the attic, perched on a dusty ledge as if it had been left there years ago. She was small, with glassy eyes and a porcelain face that had long since faded. Her once white dress was yellowed with age, and her tiny hands were delicate, almost lifelike. Something about her sent chills down my spine the moment I laid eyes on her, but I figured it was just my imagination. After all, it was just a doll, right? I brought her downstairs, thinking nothing of it. That was my first mistake. The house had always been cold, but after I moved the doll, the temperature seemed to drop even further. At night, I could hear soft creaks and shuffling, but I convinced myself it was just the old house settling. One evening, as I sat reading in the living room, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. I froze, listening. My heart pounded as the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate. I went to investigate, but when I reached the top of the stairs, there was nothing, just the empty hallway leading to the attic. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. I brushed it off, but the feeling lingered. That night, I woke up to the sound of laughter. It was faint, almost childlike, but there was something wrong with it. It didn't sound natural. My body stiffened as I listened, my heart pounding in my chest. The laughter seemed to echo through the house, but when I checked every room, I found nothing. The doll was sitting on the living room shelf, her eyes staring blankly ahead. I could have sworn I left her in the attic. I started having nightmares, horrific visions of the doll moving on its own, walking around the house at night. In the dreams, she would stand by my bed, her glass eyes fixed on me as I lay there, paralyzed with fear. I would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that she had been watching me the entire time. Things got worse after that. The paranormal occurrences escalated. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut without warning, and cold spots appeared throughout the house. One evening, I came home to find every door and window wide open, even though I was sure I had locked them before leaving. The doll, however, remained in the same spot, as if mocking me. I knew something was wrong. The doll wasn't just haunted, she was possessed. I could feel the dark energy radiating from her, like a heavy fog that filled the house. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. The laughter returned, louder now, accompanied by whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I was trapped in a living nightmare, and I didn't know how to escape. One night, I woke up gasping for air. It felt like something was sitting on my chest, suffocating me. My eyes darted around the room, but there was no one there, except the doll. She had moved again, now sitting in a chair by the window, her eyes fixed on me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The weight on my chest grew heavier, and I knew that whatever was inside the doll wasn't just a spirit, it was something much darker. A demon, perhaps, or something even worse. In a panic, I grabbed the doll and threw her into a box, sealing it with tape, but the laughter continued, echoing through the house as if the doll was mocking me. I knew then that getting rid of her wouldn't be that easy. I tried everything, burning sage, saying prayers, even reaching out to a local priest. But nothing worked. The evil presence inside the doll was too strong, too powerful. I had unleashed something that couldn't be contained, and I was paying the price for it. In a last-ditch effort, I buried the doll deep in the woods behind the house, hoping that would be enough to keep her away. But even now, I can still feel her presence, like she's waiting to return. The third story is about the doll that followed me. It started when I found the doll at a flea market. She wasn't much to look at, a small, tattered doll with missing patches of hair and a faded dress. But something about her caught my eye. The vendor was eager to get rid of her, practically shoving her into my hands before I even agreed to buy her. He didn't ask for much, just $5. And before I knew it, I was walking home with the doll in a paper bag. From the moment I brought her into the house, I felt uneasy. The air around her was thick, and every time I looked at her, I got a strange feeling, like she was watching me. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then things started to happen. The first night, I placed the doll on a shelf in the living room. I didn't give her much thought, but the next morning, I found her lying on the couch, her glass eyes staring up at me. I was sure I had left her on the shelf, but I convinced myself that I must have moved her and forgotten. I put her back on the shelf and went about my day. But the next morning, she had moved again. This time, she was sitting on the dining room table, positioned as if she was waiting for someone to join her for breakfast. Creepy didn't even begin to describe it. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had moved her without thinking, Or maybe someone else had come into the house while I was out. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Faint at first, like someone pacing back and forth in the hallway outside my bedroom. My heart raced as I listened, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I got up, crept to the door, and opened it slowly. The hallway was empty. I walked down the hall, every nerve in my body on edge. The house was dark, silent, but I could feel a presence, like I wasn't alone. When I reached the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. The doll was sitting in the middle of the floor, facing me, her head tilted to the side as if she was listening. A wave of fear washed over me. This wasn't just paranormal activity. This was something far worse. The doll was possessed, and whatever was inside her was toying with me. I tried to get rid of her the next day. I wrapped her in a bag and threw her in the trash, convinced that would be the end of it. But when I came back into the house, there she was, sitting on the shelf as if nothing had happened. I was trapped in a nightmare. The doll wasn't just moving on her own, she was following me. No matter where I put her, she would always find her way back into the house. The more I tried to ignore her, the stronger the evil presence became. Doors would slam shut on their own, lights would flicker, and cold spots appeared all over the house. One night I woke up gasping for air, my chest heavy as though something was sitting on top of me. My eyes darted around the room, and that's when I saw her. Sitting on the dresser, her glass eyes reflecting the faint glow of the moon. She was staring straight at me, her face twisted into a grotesque grin. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was completely paralyzed. The doll wasn't just haunted. She was something far more dangerous, a vessel for a demon or a spirit that had latched onto me. I could feel the darkness closing in around me, suffocating me, as the doll sat there, watching, waiting. In desperation, I called a friend who knew about supernatural occurrences. He came over, took one look at the doll, and immediately said I needed to get rid of her. For good. He brought over sage and performed a cleansing ritual, but the doll's presence didn't waver. It was as though whatever was inside her was too powerful to be banished. In the end, we buried the doll in a remote area, miles away from the house. I haven't seen her since, but I still feel her presence, like she's waiting to return. Sometimes late at night, I hear the faint sound of footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if the doll has found her way back to me. The fourth story is about the doll that wouldn't stay buried. I thought burying the doll would be the end of it. After weeks of strange occurrences, moving shadows, and an overwhelming sense of dread that hung in the air like a fog, I finally decided to bury the doll. It wasn't just a toy, it was possessed. I had found her at an estate sale, a delicate porcelain doll with a cracked face and a faded blue dress. The moment I brought her into the house, things started to go wrong. At first, it was just small things. Lights flickering, cold spots in rooms, a feeling of being watched. But soon it became clear that this was no ordinary haunted doll. Every morning, I would find her in a different spot. I'd leave her in the bedroom, but wake up to find her in the kitchen, sitting at the table as if she had moved on her own. It didn't take long for me to realize that something evil had latched onto the doll. The last straw came when I woke up in the middle of the night to find her sitting on the foot of my bed, her glass eyes reflecting the moonlight in the most unsettling way. That night, I decided I couldn't keep her in the house anymore. I had to get rid of her. My plan was simple: bury the doll deep in the woods where no one would find her. I drove out late one evening, far from the house, and dug a hole as deep as I could manage. I threw the doll in, covered her with dirt, and left without looking back. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. That night, I slept peacefully. But it didn't last. The next morning, I went outside to get the mail, and there she was, sitting on my porch, dirt still clinging to her dress. My heart dropped. I had buried her miles away, yet somehow she had found her way back. Panic surged through me as I picked her up and threw her into the trash bin, slamming the lid shut. But the feeling of relief was short-lived. When I returned to the house later that day, she was back, sitting in the hallway, her head slightly tilted as if she were mocking me. It was then that I realized I was dealing with something far worse than I had imagined. The doll wasn't just haunted, she was a vessel for something dark, something supernatural. The cold spots in the house grew worse, the lights flickered constantly, and at night I could hear faint whispers coming from the corners of the room. One night, I woke up to the sound of soft humming. I opened my eyes, and there she was, standing upright on the dresser, facing me. The room was freezing, my breath visible in the air. I tried to move, but I couldn't. It felt like something heavy was pressing down on me, holding me in place. My pulse raced as the humming grew louder, more distorted. The doll's head slowly turned toward me, her glass eyes catching the light in the most unsettling way. This wasn't just a spirit, this was something darker, something filled with malice. I could feel the weight of her presence pressing down on me, like an invisible force suffocating me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The air around me grew colder, and I could feel the darkness closing in. It was as though the doll was feeding on my fear, growing stronger with each passing second. I knew then that whatever was inside her wasn't just a real ghost. It was a demon, and it wasn't going to let me go easily. In desperation, I called a local priest, begging for help. When he arrived, the doll was sitting calmly on the couch, as if nothing had happened. But the moment he stepped into the room, he knew something was wrong. He performed a blessing on the house, but even he could sense the dark energy clinging to the doll. He told me that I needed to get rid of her once and for all, but it wouldn't be easy. Together, we took the doll to a secluded area, far away from any homes, and buried her deep in the ground. This time we said prayers over the grave, hoping that would be enough to keep her buried. I haven't seen her since, but I still don't feel safe. Sometimes late at night I hear the faint sound of humming, and I can't help but wonder if she's found her way back. I've heard true scary stories like mine before, but experiencing it firsthand is something else entirely. The nightmare of that doll is something I'll never forget.